Good evening. Welcome to Investigator News, and this is Legends of Myths and Monsters tonight. And tonight it's Montezuma's revenge, Montezuma's gold. Maybe it's even a curse. Well, I want to explain something in Utah that of the Ute tribe, and the Ute tribe has recently, over the last decade, decided they were going to um, um, put a protection around Skinwalker Ranch. I thought that was kind of weird. Um, and so, I did the thing on the Ute and the Anasazis and Navajo and the Aztecs. And from the Aztecs, they were very brutal cannibals. They would kill people, sacrifice people. It didn't matter, babies to old people. Um, and eventually they got taken over and they took off running. Basically, they first run across the Navajo, and the Navajo is a lot into skinwalkers. Um, Not only that, but the Wendigo. And they traveled up north, as we see, um, with Montezuma's treasures and the gold of Montezuma. And this was Montezuma too. I don't know if you guys knew that. Um, so what we see is skinwalkers, we see wendigos, we see Utes putting protection. The Utes claim that all of Utah has been cursed. Could that be why Skinwalker Ranch is so weird? So phenomenons that's happening there. And as we see tonight, the same thing we're seeing on Skinwalker Ranch, we're starting to see all of Utah as they look for Montezuma's gold. Um, and I had to give you that little bit because I believe the Ute is connected with the Skinwalkers, with the Wendigos, with the curse that's on Utah, and um, with the Montezuma's gold that they've been looking for. Now, there is also over in, I think, Nevada, they were saying that maybe Montezuma's gold went there. So I have a little bit on that tonight. The treasure of the mighty Aztec Emperor Montezuma when Spanish conquistadors invaded the breathtaking hall vanished without a trace. The gold disappeared. When they went to the vaults of Montezuma's gold chambers, there was nothing there. And it all vanished without a trace, says the legend. The riches were gone, and the gold disappeared. Montezuma's treasure was Oh, okay. If I went down on my end. I'm sorry about that. All right, so I'm going to get back. So the Montezuma's treasure went to they say a fabled land, Estelian. Um, the quest for the Aztec gold began with a drifter who believed it was buried near a small town in America. It is here, I believe, that Montezuma's treasure um, is real close to the town that they're all looking in, and that's Ganab. Um, and he was seeing, basically, this guy hit his head and he started the search of the treasure. And he was seeing all kinds of ghostly figures. Uh, and An army of Aztec warriors. And there was people who lost their lives and condemned this town to live under the curse of a fearsome Montezuma revenge. There is a curse at keeping people from finding the treasure. That's what I think. But as far as the town people seeing ghostly figures, I believe It was quite a few houses, and they chalked them up to being people that had died during that time. Was that part of the curse? They're not sure. But they did condemn this town. And this is what he seen in they say, a vision, a dream. And so the quest started almost over 100 years ago. In 1914, a dusty old prospector cycled down Johnson Canyon in Utah in the Southwest America. His name was Freddie Crystal. And it seems that everybody was interested in Freddie Crystal. And it does seem that he is credible. And what he had seen, what he had envisioned, and everything that he seemed to say he found or it came true. And he was in a hurry to get to a town called Kanab. And I'm sure that the people at Kanab thought Freddie sounded a bit mad. He looked different from them. His He was unshaven. His hair was very tattered, and Freddie sent Crystal was certainly had a wild tale to tell. Now, the reason I think he looked strange is because this was a town of Mormons, folks. The Mormons have already came through these towns, and so a lot of people that settled didn't quite go to Salt Lake City. They were all throughout Utah. And so he told the people of Kanab that the treasure of Montezuma was buried near their town. And if they'd help him find it, they would get a cut. And it wasn't the sort of story these no nonsense folks were used to hearing. And the bulk of the people lived in Kanab were members of the Latter day Saint religion or Mormons. And they were a small town folk and they lived very ordinary lives. They farmed, they ranched, they ran local stores. Kanab would have been just a little farming community of people trying to scratch out life with the dirt. And they didn't want much to do with him or his treasure because they say at the time they just didn't believe him. Freddie simply couldn't understand how they could turn their backs on one of the largest hauls, riches of the Spanish. First, he saw the treasure, and they were all what he seen was struck with the vast array of jade, turquoise, silver, and gold. But when the conquistadors ransacked Aztec capital, they discovered the treasure had vanished. And when they faced with agonizing death of the Aztecs, they still refused to reveal where the treasure was hidden. See, they tortured them people. Um, the people that took off, that carried the gold, um, some of them they eventually caught and they didn't have any. So they wanted them to tell them exactly where this gold was going or where it was. And so they tortured them. They would set them on fire. They would um, torture, stretch, water. They watered them. Everything they could think of that they could do to get these people to talk. And of course, none ever did. So Freddie Crystal was convinced that the priceless hoard had been spirited away to southern Utah. His belief was the absolute story of the Aztec gold that come to him in a vision. And before Freddie ever got to Kanab, he was a prospector up in Idaho and working for a mine, and he got hit in the head with a crowbar, which caused him to have, uh, um, they say, a panorama of visions after the fact. And in a vision, Freddie said he had seen a large number of Aztec warriors leading a massive procession of slaves. And this large group was headed north and crossed the Rio Grande in now Texas, then traveled across New Mexico into Arizona, and finally reached the Colorado River. The Aztecs, the long line of slaves, moved into what is now southern Utah. But then suddenly Freddie Crystal's vision started to fade, and the Aztecs and the slave completely disappeared one day. One image slowly emerged from the haziness. It was a type of rock carving known as a petroglyph. So Freddie was completely baffled why he had seen the warriors driving a slave train thousands of miles north from Aztec lands to what is southern Utah now. So Freddie decided to find out all he could about the history of the long lost Aztec nation. His reading and studying and all the newspaper articles he could find led him to events surrounding the downfall of the mighty Aztec Empire. Although the Aztecs were renowned for ruthless cruelty, mass blood sacrifices, they initially welcomed the Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortez. Cortez couldn't have timed his arrival any better. It had prophesied the white god could appear in 1519, and he was standing before them, and the Spaniard wanted to see the gold. And and the obliging Aztecs showed their new god straight to their treasury, and the conquistadors were uh, bigger in numbers than the Aztecs, and stated that all the riches in the world were to be found in one single room. When it was inevitable, hostilities broke out, and the Spanish murdered Montezuma and made it straight for his treasure. But the vaults were empty and the treasures were gone. But the Spaniards hadn't traveled too far to simply give up their biggest cache. They never laid their eyes on it, and when it came to cruelty, the conquistadors could teach the Aztecs a trickle tool. They wanted that treasure, and they were prepared to do whatever it took to find out where it was. That not a single Aztec cracked. But we're finding later on in history that one did crack. And we think that the conquistadors may have found the gold. Um, it's up to you. I want you to decide at the end of the show and see what you think. I think that they did. And Freddie then read later accounts stating the treasure had been spirited away to the north to a fabled original homeland of the Aztecs as Talon, located in what is now southwest of the U.S. legend, or the United States. And legend has it the Aztec warriors were sealed up with the treasure in a cave. And their mission was to protect their emperor's treasure from anyone who broke in to steal it. And now, last, Freddie realized the meaning of his vision. Now, you keep hearing over just the last few minutes how the Aztec claimed that Utah was their land. Well, it was. At one point of time, the Aztecs owned all the way up. They say even parts of Montana, Colorado, the Four Corners. So it was, and they loved this land that where Kanab was. And they found that it was safe. It was easy to get away from uh, dangers or the conquistadors or whoever they needed to hide from. And they created many, many tunnels. So Freddie was convinced he seen an army of slaves carrying the treasure trove far north, as far as the Colorado River. And at that point, the vision blurred. But one tantalizing clue revealed, and Freddie believed it was the marker point um, of the location of Montezuma's treasure. And he did have a clue. It was a petroglyph that had been carved onto a red wall, but the southwestern states of America are full of red canyons covered with thousands of petroglyphs. For Freddie to find one particular petroglyph somewhere out in the vast wilderness seemed impossible. It was an impossible task for Freddie Crystal, and he, at this point, hit a brick wall. Months later, Freddie had pretty much given up on ever finding the treasure. Then one evening, after prospecting, uh, his eye was drawn to an article in the paper, and it was all about a Mormon elder, Levi Young, had gone to Canada to conduct some church business, and for fun, taken some pictures and done uh, some sightseeing in the gorgeous country. But the photograph that really made Freddie sit up and pay attention that he had seen in his panoramic vision. Levi Young had told him where it was, and somewhere on a canyon wall, somewhere near a town called Canib. So Freddie jumped on his bike, and Freddie was known for this bike. Every time they seen him coming, the townspeople would know he had either had another vision, or maybe he had the Montezuma gold, or he was going to be disappointed and forlorn once again. So he jumped on his bike and headed 300 miles to the south, and he was convinced the long lost treasure was real again. But Freddie's blind faith in his cause wasn't shared by the Mormons. And so the and most of the people in Kanab, and they didn't give him the time of day, but one gentleman was willing to take a chance. His name was Oscar Robinson. He owned a ranch, and he agreed to let Freddie come and stay at his ranch. And so Oscar Robinson took Freddie in and gave him free board and lodging. It was a cowboy ranch. So Oscar Robinson had a bunch of livestock, some sheep, cows. So he helped subsidize and give Freddie a stake. A lot of other ranchers really didn't like Freddie, though. And he was, they say, a freeloader. The purpose to be in Cannon was to find the gold. Now, Freddie had landed on his feet on the Robinson Ranch right in the heart of the canyons, and it was surrounding Kanab, and it was prime petroglyph hunting. And every morning, Freddie would set out early and from the ranch, and he needed to check every single yard in the vast canyons and the cliffs, and out for miles and miles around. And the town that's surrounded by these beautiful red cliffs. And he knew this petroglyph had to be there because this gentleman had the picture. It's rugged country, and so it's huge. I mean, it's almost next to the Grand Canyon. Many of the canyon walls are covered with petroglyphs. And Freddie had to check out every single one. And so for one person to try and pinpoint the exact location was an overwhelming task, but not for Freddie. He was a man on a mission. He was dedicated by a vision, and he searched the hills for about 2 years. All the while, the ranchers at Oscar Robinson's ranch making fun of him nightly, telling him how crazy he was. And so Freddie would show the photograph to anyone who would still give him the time of day. And then in 1916, he finally got some fantastic news. One of the men that seen the petroglyph that Freddie thought could point him to the location of the crystal treasure couldn't believe how he could have overlooked it. It was just 2 miles up the road from the ranch. And found out that some had told him the petroglyph had been blasted off the wall. It seems a farmer had wanted to create a shelter under the rock to store hay, and he unwittingly reduced Freddie's vital marker to Montezuma's treasure to a sad heap of sand. So Freddie seemed to have taken the news badly and vanished just as suddenly as he appeared. And the people of Kanab assumed that that was the last they'd ever see of him. And then in early 1922, a familiar figure seen cycling along Johnson Canyon once again. Uh, they were very surprised. And Freddie showed up back in town, and Freddie made a beeline for the Robinson Ranch, where he had some great news for his old partner, Oscar. He said he'd spent the last 6 years in Mexico finding a map. And after sudden destruction of the petroglyph, the desperate Freddie had recalled on his fevered vision he had seen in vast procession of the slaves. Now, so he knew the capital of the Aztec Empire was the place to go, and find to find the where a map or a treasure or the treasure be there itself or lead him to the treasure. And the Spanish raised the ancient Aztec city. Um, Basically, Aztec was burnt to the ground. It was nothing. And what did they do? They rebuilt it as Mexico City. So when Freddie traveled to the city, once he heard of an intriguing rumor, it was said that the Spanish had a map, and it revealed the location of Montezuma's treasure. And in the mayhem of the bloody Spanish conquest, the precious map had been lost. Freddie learned that old colonial records were stored in the basement of the monastery. So in the dead of night, Freddie jumped the wall, broke in, and finally he found exactly what he was looking for. The map described the area that had the cliff, and below the cliff there was supposed to be a marsh. And then it was surrounded by 7 mountains. The cliffs and the marshes reminded Freddie of the landscape of Johnson Canyon, but included something he'd never seen in many of his trips. Though uh, the hills had a set of steps leading upwards. Freddie was convinced the treasure had to be hidden behind the entrance, and he returned once again to searching the hills and his map. And as he would match up different geographical locations, and now he Alvin Judd Oscar Robinson's 16-year-old son-in-law was particularly keen at this. And he and his pal Cowhide Adams would join Freddie in the search. So they basically, um, he had 2 more people to help him out. And the thing about it, the steps that would lead to the cave was going to be sealed up with a layer of mortar. And so that they knew they were looking for something uh, like a wall that didn't look, or a wall that would look out of place. And so he was lined up and ready to spot these 7 mountains. And they all did lined up on Thanksgiving in 1922. He scanned the horizon, and out of the map, he found the perfect match to the picture. Perfect everything, the 7 mountains, the cliffs, the marsh, everything. He couldn't believe his luck. And so he was bound determined that the cliff containing the crystal, the cave containing the treasure cave crystal, scanned the canyon, and he was looking for a set of footsteps. And so he did see, and there is a point in this canyon that looked like steps, and it's only in one place. But when he went up to look at it, it just didn't lead to anything. So he assumed they had hidden steps or made steps that went to nowhere. It kind of sounds like Winchester House of Mystery in a way. So leaving the youngsters in the dust, he went out and looking around trying to find an opening. But there was a little indentation. He had a little bit of sixth sense on this, and he pulled out a pocket knife and he started digging. And um, and then they were digging with their hands, and this the sandy faces something harder, like mortar between the rocks. And the mortar was made from limestone material, so they really did feel like they found something. Obviously, somebody had brought something up here and had a wall in front of it. So he believed he was just feet away from the riches that had been snatched away from Cortez. So um, uh, they had went to digging, and they figured, oh my goodness, here it is. The youngsters uh, were digging. Even the people in town started showing up one by one, starting to dig and thinking that maybe this could be. When all of a sudden they got to a hard portion, they flipped it back, and it was along a sandy cavern, and there was actually a booby trap, he thinks, and a boulder that had rolled onto one of his legs, and it actually pinned him. And the curse of Montezuma, Freddie's desperate shout for help, um, if they would have left him there, they said he surely would have died. So there was no sign of Aztec warriors. There was nothing in the hole, just more dangerous booby traps lying just ahead. But it grew excitement with him. And he said, if there is more booby traps and we're finding more, then the more dangerous, the closer we should be getting. And so he really did. Um, um, he wanted to tell everyone he was on the verge that this he was finding small pieces of gold, gold trinkets. So they were starting to find a little bit of gold. And so, of course, he had the town all excited. And the community was basically in with this adventure to find the treasure. And within a few days, um, town folks jumped in their buggies and rode to Johnson's Canyon to dig out the treasure. And so um, they went through and they dug, and eventually nothing was ever found. Um, and they had shovels, they had picks, they had buckets, everything they could take up there. But of course, um, Kanab was basically ended up being an isolated community, and um, and the thing is this is during the gold panners too. So they had a tent city where tons of people were certain that they could even find the gold. And more, they didn't want the outsiders, so they would run off the outsiders. The townspeople would, and tell them they had to go elsewhere to dig for gold. And get this. So what they did to keep the outsiders out is um, they found themselves women to run their city council, and they would put a lid on any information that came out of any of those men, these gold panners that wanted to come and steal their gold or steal their treasures. So all the women of their council, or I should say, the council was all women. So despite the what they called the petticoat council, the best efforts, pretty soon rumors began to spread. Strange things were afoot. um, they were everybody was getting excited, and they really felt they were close to um, basically the big dig. They said it was the big dig, and yet the more they dug, they didn't find anything, not even a chunk of gold, and there was no sign of any golds, just tons of dirt, and people were starting to doubt that there was actually a treasure to be found. And so after a while, they left one by one. And finally, the last of the people felt like they had been shafted, they'd been scammed. They fell for his vision once again. And they swore that they were never going to do that again. I can imagine what their hearts might have felt for Freddie Crystal at this point. After 10 years of looking for a treasure, he was about to quit. And now Freddie himself was so discouraged, he took another look at the map, and it hit him that the tunnels were probably just temporary holdings of the treasure, because they were finding, or he was finding, these holes. And the holes led to caves, and the caves went all over the place. And it had big rooms and big, what they call cathedral rooms. It had holes that led to different chambers. It was holes that were just caves and nothing in there. And so, looking all at all, he decided everything that was dug out, maybe there was something that was missed. So he went through all that dirt all over again, and he didn't find nothing. And so he decided to go back into the caves. And he spent quite a long time and never did find anything. And so everybody had basically lost interest. He was even losing interest. 1924, the empty hand townsfolk finally decided they weren't going to dig, they weren't going to fall for it anymore. And that the man who filled their heads full of the treasure disappeared one day in 1924. And no one knows what really happened to Freddie, but some speculate that someone got angry at him, someone murdered him in a fury, all a wasted time, killed him for the map. Others believe that he incurred the wrath of Montezuma. They thought maybe he's uh, not the last to die searching for the treasure. So Alvin Judd he kept the faith in Freddie, and he spent 30 more years digging with no trace, no trace. And so, almost 70 years later, another stranger showed up talking about Montezuma and the long lost treasure. Um, his name was Raymond Dillman. Um, and the Dillman showed up and talked to a gentleman that had bought the farm um, that was right there at the base of the mountains. Now, if you watch the History Channel, the Dillmans are still looking. It's the Aztec of Lost Gold, or the Gold of the Aztecs. It's a show like that. And they did one season. And Dillman was basically the grandson of one of the original members that dug. And so when they they started kind of looking around, and they drove up in an old green van, and it was full of these really huge Spanish looking people, they said. And the guy says his mother was kind of scared because she's out there alone, and she didn't dare go out. She just kind of was yelling through the door, as from what I've been able to read. And when they saw the occupants, she was very frightened. And the dogs that are normally very nice dogs, love everyone, was had a big bark. And so they asked if there was any hieroglyphics on walls, and she said, "Yeah, there's some right over there." And so they decided they would want to look at them, and they were looking at circles and exact pictures. They were looking for the final image um, that needed to. They said a type of bull's eye that they had seen. They said there's a bullseye petroglyph, a nine spiral circle confirmed Ray Dillman's theory. And he says that Montezuma Treasures is buried on the property. And she said, "Oh, really?" Um, yeah, and another family would probably politely say Ray Dillman to leave out, because they've all known about the Montezuma Treasures. And here we go again, they thought. It'd been a part of his grandfather and great grandfather was a part of Freddie Crystal's, a whole 9 yards of wanting to go dig. So to find this guy on their doorstep, um, Dillman told the judge that he had spent previous 16 years studying a curious set of tablets called the Peralta Stones, and they were found in the 1950s. And the Peralta Stones are thought to be some of the map to the legendary Dutchman mine. Okay, so they had went and they had investigated the Dutchman's mine, that's over in Arizona. So um, when they went and they started looking, they ran across a gentleman that knew all about the story. So he took them up, he took them around to what he thought was the gold that the Lost Dutchman had found. And what he explained to the Dillmans is that it was so close to a regular gold running mine that had been going for quite a few years. And so what he showed them was rocks throughout these caves that were full of gold. These rocks were full of gold. And he poured water on it, and he showed them, see, these are all full. And if you crush up the rocks, you can get the gold. And then there would be gold nuggets laying around. And so he said he didn't think Montezuma's treasure was really at the Lost Dutchman's mine. That was just uh, a mountains that were full of gold. And of course, there is a gentleman out there making money on a gold mine. So they then, this gentleman told him about over there in Utah that there had been so many archaeologists, geologists, uh, and those that looked at the petroglyphs and those that were looking into history was saying that Montezuma's gold and treasures were in Utah. So that's what led the Dillmans to the Judds. And so it turned out that they they got a heavy excavator and they moved probably a lot of soil. They were digging uh, as much as they could. They were digging around the cliffs. Um, there was a thing with 9 spiral with a bullseye that they wanted to find, and they finally did. And they dug next to it, and they thought, okay, here it is. And what they found was when it was exposed was a grisly find of bones. Um, they said there was just tons of bones that were piled up in this small cave. And so they thought, well, this has to be the bodies of those slaves. But when they had them checked out, it turned out it wasn't but a couple hundred years ago. It wasn't way back during Montezuma um, or even when Montezuma was thought to be in the area. So they, they said maybe, maybe they're they're going in the right place. Maybe the bones are all there as a sign. They thought. So they kept digging, and all of a sudden, they hit a ledge, and suddenly a small object tumbled towards them. And it was all backed up as a skull. It was in a pot. And on so the pot fell open, the head rolled at them, and then they went and picked it up. And when they looked inside, there was over 200 pieces of turquoise in it. It wasn't the Montezuma's treasure, but they knew that this was at least the fourth or fifth area where they had found bones and they had found some treasures. It seemed like a good sign. It really did to them. And um, then they found a, a it was kind of built up like it would be an altar. It was on top of a hill. And they found quite a few of these, 4 or 5 of these, that up on these hills because they said the Aztec worshiped the hills and the mountains and they would put things, or they would do sacrifices on the top. So they found this. This great big one on one of the tallest mountains or hills, and it was about 6, 7 feet tall, and then it had a line where it would like drain off the face of the cliff. Now, some say that's where they did blood rituals. Others say that they had done a type of water hydroponics, and they were saying that's what that was. But on top of a hill, on top of a altar, that didn't seem plausible to me. There was holes with sticks. They could, um, they I don't know what it was for, but they said they could put sticks in it. But it was, you could tell it was a some sort of ritual, blood ritual. I don't know, but when they checked with the surrounding Indian tribes, they found out none of them did blood rituals, but they remind them of the Anasazis. Um, and they were chased, and there was um, the skinwalkers, there was the Navajo, there was the Aztecs that all did blood rituals. And so they were saying that could have been proof that the Aztecs were actually there. They were finding Aztecs treasures, and then they were starting to see the same signs, and the petroglyphs even matched up with what they were finding uh, around a lot of the stone statues, um, a lot of the buildings in Mexico. Um, and what was really more odd than anything, you guys, is right around this area. the Indians let the Dillards know that they spoke the same dialect as the Aztecs. And they said there was also a weird group called the Freeman tribe. And they were kind of a mixed culture. And they said they really didn't know what they were, if they were um, maybe Aztec or a mix of Aztec and the local tribes. But they lived out on um, an island off of the Salt Lake. Um, and they were even claiming the Freemans, the Fremonts, I believe is what it's called. They were even claiming that um, they knew of Montezuma's treasures. Fremonts, is that what they're called? Yeah, okay, thank you, William. So William knows the story. I should have brought him on with me tonight. He would have, I think he would like this one. So they were talking, and that part of what they were hearing was the white birds, and the white birds were with the Fremonts, and the Fremonts may have had the treasures. So when they went out and looked, they really didn't find much, but they did find petroglyphs that did match with the ones that were around um, um, where they were digging for the Montezuma's gold. Um, and it was the same style, the same worries, the same spirals, the same jagged lines. And see what back when um, um, Freddie was looking, it was a zigzag line. It was that he was looking for, and it would lead to the mountains that would lead to the gold. Well, they had the same markings, the same things they were finding on how to get Montezuma's gold and his treasures was the same markings in 3 or 4 places. Now that's in the northern part of Utah. So now you go to the southern part of Kanab and you have the same markings. So this is something that's all the way through um, Utah by the Indians, by the American Indians. So it was all the same. But when they were trying to get it all in the history books, um, because they were even saying that there was more um, um, American Indians in the area than there were the Mormons. And this is something that was never portrayed in anything that I had seen on YouTube or read. No one but the Indians mentioned it. And so when they had all this land, and then the Mormons moved through, but then when it came to taking their rights away, out of the whole state of Utah that was theirs to begin with, they only really let them have about 10% of the land. And then they swore, the Utes swore with the um, Unitas and the Utes, all basically cursed the land at that point because they had been so um, mistreated. Not only were they controlled by the Mormons, they were controlled by the white people that had moved in, and then the army was just as cruel, and then they took their land away. So this is where I think that the land was eventually cursed, and so um, and then you go with the blood sacrifices. You go with the some of the rituals that the skinwalkers did and the Navajos did up in that area. Now there was also even known to be giants that had went through and had decimated a lot of the people. Um, 80% of the land is controlled by the federal government in Utah. See, well, it says they got a little bit back. But for the most part, um, most of Utah was belonged to the American Indians. And they said it was one of the states that um, one tribe. or one or two, and they were all associated together. They all spoke the Aztec language and dialect. And they said this was the only state that they said in America at that time that had this going on. So, and they didn't do blood sacrifices. They said they didn't eat people. But now, when they went out to the Fremont Island, they did find animal bones that were found and also human bones that had been cooked. They said they can't say that they ate them, but they could say that they were cooked. So they don't know if this was another sacrifice because Aztecs were known for sacrificing people. So, um, so these brothers basically um, all of the bones, a lot of them, there couldn't be any carbon dating on, but a lot of the skeletons were around 2000 BC, which is um, three and a half thousand years before, or three and a half thousand years before uh, Aztec slaves were even there. So they know that wasn't a lot of the bones that they were finding weren't during. It wasn't the Aztec slaves. So there was another about in time that there was something there that was killing them people. So um, basically, they um, decided that they found out that there was a body of water that um, the Aztecs used. Remember, I said the hydroponics, where they were building a water system, not only in the caves, they had certain ways of doing it. This is the same thing the Aztecs did in Mexico. So this isn't nothing new to them, it's something they already knew. So they had dug in to this cave. Well, basically, they started wondering why they would fill up this one certain area because it didn't make no sense. It wasn't water that was going through that would actually help the people. It was just like they made a pond. Well, just under the water, there's a cave. So let's see who I believe unearthed the same guy that's at Skinwalker Ranch. I think his name is Scott. He went out there and he's investigated it. There's all of these. Get this. This is what really gets me. Everybody that's went there and investigated is finding the same thing. They're hearing the same stories. They're looking at the same newspaper articles. They are. Um, well, let me get this going so you guys can see some of these pictures of what they found. And there we go. Well, let's go. There we go. So while you guys are watching some of these pictures, it'll amaze you what they found, and some of the pictures of the Indians back then. So anyway, um, we when he went there, they of course there was a first set. The Dillons, I believe, hired someone to go and divers to go down and look, and they got down there. They were freaking out. They said they were seeing ghosts. They were seeing half skeleton people. They were being choked. Their masks were being ripped off. They were being pulled and dragged like down into holes. And they were also seeing like what they thought was Aztecs underwater. And of course, they freaked out and they all wanted out. Well, now when this guy from Unearthed Scott, he put a camera down first. And um, he noticed that there was a lot of silt and everything kept getting stirred up. And he said maybe that's kind of what they were seeing because if you watch it, Unearthed with Montezuma, and it's on YouTube, you can kind of see why he's underwater. That it's mixed up and it looks. You can almost make shapes out of it. So I'm assuming that's what they were seeing. But for their stuff to be ripped off and they were being choked and they were screaming that they couldn't breathe. And these are some of the top divers, not only for San Francisco, but for Salt Lake City. So um, now, so when Scott went down there, he said everything was fine, but then all of a sudden something happened with the hose and the hose quit working. And so he had to get out of the water. So basically, folks, um, as uh, what the Dillons have found is more artifacts, and they feel like they're getting closer. But they're seeing things, they're feeling things, they're having nightmares, they're seeing um, things in the orbs. They're starting to feel like there's something wrong with the ground. When they dig, things happen. Um, so it's almost the same thing that we'd see at Skinwalker Ranch. Of if you look at everything that's been going on in Kanab, it's almost identical to what's going on at Skinwalker Ranch. Um, yeah, they go pretty far. Uh, the Aztecs were just as smart as the Spanish. How many traps could be created by a slave army? That's right. Aztecs moved as far north as Banff, Canada. Well, if you look, if you follow the Skinwalkers and the Wendigos, they go all the way to the East Coast too. Uh, um, and yeah, I totally believe in these Skinwalkers and these Wendigos, uh, and they're pretty creepy. And the thing about it is, when you look at uh, when the when they talk about the Skinwalkers and the Wendigos that goes up through that valley, these people were running for their lives. They were going in these caves. They were going back as far as they could with their valuables. So they're thinking some of these valuables might belong to these tribes. And some of the tribes they have found are cannibals. They have found that some of these tribes still do the rituals and the blood sacrifices, and some of them are wouldn't have nothing to do with it. They're basket weavers. They're vegetarians. They're so you know what my thing was. You see, you can see on that map. Look at Montezuma's territory. Um, oh, you guys might have to back it up and look at it. You know what got me was when wanted to see about cattle mutilations, because what I started doing was comparing what's going on at Skinwalker Ranch to what's happening there, and even up around Salt Lake City where they're having the same issues. Or Salt Lake, I'm sorry, the Great Salt Lake, around where the Fremonts were. And come to find out, there was. They weren't finding cattle mutilations. The cattle were just simply disappearing. Um, and this was around Canada, and also up around where the Fremonts were. They were finding that bison were disappearing, and some were being mutilated, but some of the fur was gone. And they assumed it was white settlers looking for furs. Um, so, um, so the cattle mutilations. Well, then what about the stuff in the sky? Well, then I got to looking to see if anybody has seen UFOs around these same areas, and lo and behold, there was. They have been seeing them around where cannabis, and they've been seeing them around Salt Lake City and around the Great Salt Lake, and they claim that maybe the Great Salt um the Salton planes could be the reasoning for it. But then it doesn't explain for what they're finding as far as petroglyphs. Now, petroglyphs are all the same in all three spots. And they've even found the same petroglyphs, get this, at Skinwalker Ranch. And when they talk to the Utes around the area, like I said, they put uh, a protection all the way around the ranch so that nothing evil can come out. So that, here we go right back to the Utes that says that the all of Utah is cursed, and more they're starting to believe this because of so many areas is having the same issues. They're seeing the same things. They're experiencing the same things. So really, I would like the people out at Skinwalker Ranch to go farther out. That mountain that they always look at and they seem to get a lot of issues from, the Indians on the other side that have that land has said there is stuff that comes out of that mountain all the time. They said there is something going on with that mountain. Uh, there are 36 portals on Earth. William, I don't know. There might even be more now. I think that these portals is what they're feeling and seeing all through Utah, but they say even Arizona and even the areas where the Aztecs and I'll have to tell you about the snail. Oh my gosh, there's the snail, amber snail. Uh, but they're finding the same thing around Sedona. They're seeing it around parts of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. They're starting to see these little uh, uh, the petroglyphs with the spiral, but they're starting to find out there could be portals. And you're right. And the thing with the portals is the monsters come out, but they don't go back in. And I think this is part of the demons. And this is something that the petroglyphs in Canab and right around Skinwalker Ranch are warning everybody about. It's all about these demons. Some of them even look like ant people, and there are groups of American Indians that thought that there were ant people gods that came down. So a lot of if you look at these and you stop it and you check these things out, you'll see that there are a lot of the horses, cattle, um, these weird square looking people. They said uh, not all of the people are the same way. There's some that have things sticking out of them, some with two heads, some with no arms, some with wings, some with um, just weird bodies, some with no bodies. There are heads that float, they say. So now the snails. Now, when they went diving down in that pond, that water I was telling you about, where they were being drug under, uh, the federal feds came in and stopped them and said they're no longer allowed to dive. And they're not even sure if they want cameras down there because of the amber snail. Uh, they say it's close to extinct. And get this, the snail comes from Mexico. And they don't know how the snail got from Mexico to Utah, but it did. So here now we have snails that is blocking the Dylans from going into the water and even unearthed. I think he even wanted in. And how weird is it that nobody wants the American Indians, the Ute and the Uintas don't want anybody digging. They don't want no one in the water. They don't want no one digging because they say every time that happens, that things get very evil, and it brings the evil out of the ground. So um, more and more, I'm starting to keep an eye on that Aztec Gold Show, but I also am keeping an eye on Skinwalker Ranch because maybe the gold is there. Maybe the Aztec treasure is there. We don't know. I want them to look in that hill. I want them to dig into that mountain. I want them to see if there's caves, you know, because it's so active. And it seems like that is the most active. Oops. Let me, oops. So, oh, well, heck, I should let it play. It was pretty. Has some pretty things on there. I'm not sure which one it is. It's one of the videos I made though. So um, uh, I'm in now. I'm really interested. I'm really interested in what's going on with Skinwalker Ranch. I'm curious to find out about Canib. I'm very curious, maybe around Salt Lake itself. The Mormons aren't interested, though. That was a question that was asked to quite a few that's been investigating it is what are the Mormons doing to help? The Mormons don't want no part of this. They think it's a type of evil. So, um, wow. So Montezuma's gold, I think, is out there. It's in one of those mountains. It's just someone finding it. I don't think it's going to be gold nuggets. Oh, and get this: when they drilled down into one of the top of the mountains inward, and when they pulled it out, their drill bit had gold on it, and it wasn't like the gold rock like they seen in Superstition Mountains. This was different, and they said it was dark, so they stuck a camera down in it, and they thought they seen like a skeleton um, and a pile of something they're not sure of, and they think it might be some gold. Uh, these were like gold chips. Um, and it was more like it was a pulled gold off of an object. So that's their next thing they want to do is get down and find out what's in there. And see, that's what I've been thinking all along is what's under them altars. The Aztec, not only the Aztecs, but even the Egyptian have a thing about putting things under altars. Uh, and one guy went up, him and his wife, and they were looking into uh, the tops of these mountains. And they even found like a miniature Stonehenge or like an altar that kind of looked like Stonehenge, but they found out it was a wall, a makeshift wall. But these stones weren't from this area and they were too big, which to me says giants, but that's just me. Anyway, folks, that is it for the Montezuma's Gold, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please share. Uh, and next week, I kind of want to start going over all the creatures again. Since a lot of new people have joined us since I started Legends of Myths and Monsters, how did how did Lewis and Clark travel? How do you think the Aztecs were different and lived in the island city? I, they both had horses. Um, Aztecs had lots of money. They had lots of gold, and they did travel by horses. I is that what you're asking, William? Um, not only that, but um, I would, to me, I would go with what some of the locals even said that follow what the same steps the people took. There's a way to find out, trace where the people, these slaves, the track they took. They know the route, so why hasn't anybody followed the route? See that way they all go into the where they want the treasure to be. No one's doing the route. What if they left a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, and so forth? That's what I'm thinking. Could even be a possibility. I think they're going to find it though in one of the mountains. I really do. They traveled up the rivers. That's right. That's where I'm thinking. The Superstition Mountains. I keep telling them to go look in that river because the river comes down from the mountains um, and gold seems to end up in the rivers. And I keep telling Superstition Mountain people, the Lost Dutchman gold mine, I believe, that they ought to be looking in the rivers. So uh, everybody chasing gold. And gold's going to be worth something once the dollar falls. We're going to be looking at gold and silver and probably crystals. Crystals is a big one right now. So, anyway, that is it. And I hope you enjoyed the show and I hope you enjoyed the slideshow. Go back through and watch. um, because you'll see some stuff in these pictures, some of the artifacts that they found. And this isn't from any Indian tribe. The Utes claim nothing of the artifacts that have been found, but they do claim that it should be theirs, because Montezuma did say that the gold or the treasures would eventually be given to the tribes um, around the Montezuma area. So, well, thank you, DB. I kind of enjoyed this one. This has been a pretty good one. A lot of info on it, and the fact that that is a possibility that it is out there. Um, they're not finding this big amount of treasure that they know it was in Mexico at one time. It's written, it's been written about. I think they even have a list of things that Montezuma supposedly had in that treasure vault that is just gone. They don't think the Aztecs, they don't think the Spanish got a hold of it. They don't even think the conquistadors got a hold of it. Now they did go all the way up and they did search them hills. Now, like I said at the beginning of the show, there is a good possibility that the conquistadors did find the gold and took it. But when you look into their riches after, there's nothing there. It's almost like if they did find it, they didn't spend it. They hid it and didn't spend it. They had their own, but they didn't come into a great amount of wealth at the time that the Aztecs went up, and then when they had even went up, and even the Ute and the Navajo, the people of the Skinwalker, none of them ended up being very very wealthy. Neither did the Utes. So I think it's still there. It's just somebody's going to stumble into one of these caves like they did with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they're going to say, "Hey, here it is." Uh, they did those caves and looked through those caves over and over and over again for treasures, and some of the clay pots they found. I'm talking the Dead Sea Scrolls right now. Empty. They didn't find nothing. And then all of a sudden, wham, there's our Dead Sea Scrolls. I think it's going to be the same thing with the Aztec gold, is someone's just going to stumble across it. And it's probably not even going to be a very big room because if you look into the Aztecs and their history of their gold, they show a room on quite a few videos that the room doesn't look that big. Um, I mean, it's a good, I don't know, uh, a good sized living room or in a living room and maybe a kitchen or dining room together. I mean, it's a good sized room, but not the size that I thought. And um, if all that's in there, it can easily fit in one of these caves with these cathedrals. They've even found recently a room that looks like it's been done in bricks that they found. Did they find the treasure? No. They found bones. They're finding bones and they're finding small chunks of artifacts that are from the Aztec people. So, anyway, um, tomorrow morning we're back again. We'll have the morning weather show, and we'll have news. And I got William has been sending me stuff, and I'll have to take a look at it. We might have a big Ukraine report in the morning. Um, things are happening, things are moving. Even China's moving around, and uh, Russia's moving around, and I'm not sure with Ukraine. But anyway, you guys, I'm so glad you watch the shows that we have, and I think everybody's got their little favorites. Sometimes it's this one, sometimes it's Corruption Files, and a whole bunch of them over in Facebook love that morning weather show. We get a lot of views. So with that, you guys, have a wonderful evening. And go on back, like I said, and look at some of the pictures um, and some of these caves. and see what you could see. Um, and anyway, God bless, and subscribe and hit the bell, hit that like button, and over there in Facebook, you're going to follow and hit the like button. And we will see everyone in the morning. It's a brand new week, and I'm feeling great. I'm feeling great. And I'm ready to do this week. And I have a lot of really good shows planned. So, with that, God bless everyone, and we'll see you in the morning. Bye bye.